well, you know, we can certainly accommodate, okay? We want to make sure that you get a fair say too, so. We're going to do the opening statements in alphabetical order, and then do that in reverse order for the closing statements. Keeping time is important. Our timekeeper, Dave, over there, sitting in the front row, will have, I guess, a phone, keeping time, alerting myself and the candidates when to essentially stop talking. A yellow card, he's going to hold that up when you have 30 seconds left. When you get to the red card, that means your time is up. But like soccer, you won't get kicked out, okay? If you're red carded, you just have to wind it up very quickly. So we hope the rules are clear. We're going to begin with the opening statements now, alphabetical order. 2 minutes, 2.5 for Mr. Compson. We're going to start with Liberal candidate Amanda Polker-Mott. Go ahead, please.
Hello. So it's alphabetical order.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was given the wrong list here. Drew Compson. It is Drew, yes.
The Progressive Conservative candidate and the New Blue candidate are no shows. We have NDP, Green, Ontario Party, and Liberal Party.
I am born and raised in this part of the township. I grew up in Verona. I taught swimming at the beach in Verona here for 4 years. And I also have focused on living my life in this area. I graduated from Sydenham High School and local public school, and have focused on creating changes that we need. I would like to thank Lions Hall for having us here this evening. I've been in this hall for many occasions and events, weddings, celebrations of life, and everything in between. And it has been a great opportunity to be able to work for this riding and try to turn this riding into a orange riding for this time around. Sorry. My school was closed. One of my public schools was closed in 2013 during the Liberal government. It was Intermore Public School in Parham, and that has now increased the time students have to be bused to a public school, whether that is to Granite Ridge and Charlotte Lake, or to Prince Charles and Verona, or Mountain Grove to Land Lakes. So that is something where we have definitely focused on, and it's not okay. The Conservative government has also made sure that we did not actually have any supports going through schools as well over the last 4 years. And as a rural, someone who attended rural schools, I know that they are backbone to our community. They are what brings the communities together, and that people are surrounded in the school site. We plan to fully fund a full education system in Ontario because it is time for there to be change, and we know there has been no support to where education is. Sorry. We see the teachers. We know what you have been going through over the last 2 years. You have had so much more on your plate. You have been dealt where you have had to focus on online learning and in-class learning and pivoting in a moment of 1 day's notice. That's not okay. And as an NDP candidate, I will support you.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to Thomas Mulder, the Ontario Party. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this event, and thank you especially for ensuring that all the candidates have been invited. True democracy requires that all views are represented. On June 2nd, we'll have a choice to stick with our legacy parties who've got a proven track record of leaving Ontario kind of flailing, or even vote for real change. Ontario Party is that change. We're the true conservatives, standing for fiscal responsibility, balancing budgets, reducing escalating inflation by sourcing reliable Canadian energy, bringing back local manufacturing jobs, and stopping foreign intervention in our province, whether it be from the influence of the World Economic Forum or from foreign housing purchases. You may be thinking that these are more some of the same old promises, but I can tell you that the Ontario Party is not made of career politicians or bureaucrats. they may know how to tickle your ears or buy your votes. We're real people who live and work in this province, and we've had enough. We stand for freedom for all. We want to protect you and your family, and we defend the rights for all to practice their faith as they choose. We are the only party that is not a top-down directive kind of party. Our party leader, Derek Sloan, has committed that our elected candidates will be free to vote on their conscience and to represent their constituents, as MPPs are supposed to do. Support the Ontario Party on June 2nd to win back the heart and soul of Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Dr. Marlene Spruitt with the Green Party. No, that's wrong again. Amanda, see, I'll get it right, don't worry. Amanda Polker-Mott with the Liberal Party.
Thank you. So I'm Amanda, your Ontario Liberal candidate. Thank you to the teachers' unions for hosting this event here this evening. I'm a mom, a teacher, and a former municipal councillor. I ran in 2018 because of an experience that I had with my mom going through the healthcare system. And I saw how hard our frontline healthcare workers were working, but the limited resources that they were working with. And I'm not one to sit by the sidelines, so I ran in 2018, and here I am running again. We've been through a pandemic, and everybody knows the gaps in our healthcare system, especially around home care and long-term care. And I'm just dumbfounded by the fact that when the Conservative government came in, they eliminated long-term care home inspections. That was before the pandemic. In the middle of the pandemic, they took powers away from families who wanted to hold long-term care homes accountable. And there's this agenda to push privatization of our healthcare system, which I do not believe is the right direction. We should be keeping our healthcare system in public hands. And let's talk about education for a moment. When you have a Minister of Education who went to private school and an assistant to that minister who was homeschooled, I believe that that sends a very clear message to the people of Ontario where the Conservatives' priorities are when it comes to our education system. And they've cut OSAP funding. Their current election budget includes cuts of $1.3 billion. So our riding has been underrepresented for years. And instead of being so focused on Toronto, the Liberals are taking a holistic approach to all of Ontario. And I'm really excited to be here tonight to share our plan with you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Polker-Mott. And now let's get to Marlene Spruitt with the Green Party. I'm going to get it right eventually.
And I'll echo my colleagues' comments to thank you for the organizers for giving us this opportunity. Our green vision is for an Ontario that cares for its people and the planet that we live on. My background as a family physician and a previous medical officer of health have demonstrated to me over the past few years that the greatest threats to human health and our economy are that of poverty and climate change. The general population recognizes that human activity, in particular fossil fuels use, is the most significant contributor to this climate change, but the big three legacy parties have talked the talk and failed to take significant action to move the needle forward. During the past 4 years, Ford has reversed any progress by canceling over 700 green energy projects, ripping out electric vehicle charging stations, fighting the carbon tax import, wasting your tax dollars in doing so. Dollars that could have been spent shoring up healthcare, fixing long-term care, or schools, or small businesses during the pandemic. We need to take action now to reduce our fossil fuel dependence, while at the same time making life more affordable for you. We need to protect our vulnerable populations, those living with disabilities, workers trying to survive on unpredictable minimum wage jobs, seniors living in long-term care, or needing home supports, individuals struggling with mental health or addictions, children and families recovering from lost learning and income during the pandemic. The Green Greens have a plan, real solutions for real people. We won't just build highways to solve those problems. The Ontario Greens platform presents a plan to invest in a caring society where people get the health care they need, connected communities with housing we can afford, and a new climate economy that creates jobs, reinvigorates Ontario's manufacturing sector, and protects our natural heritage. Thanks very much, everyone, for coming, and I look forward to your questions.
Yes, you can think about your questions now and line up soon. I'm going to ask the first one right now. Let's jump right into the candidates. Talk about affordability, from gas to groceries to housing. The cost of living is rising rapidly. Many people are finding it hard to keep pace. If elected, what would you do to make things more affordable for the residents in this riding? I'm going to start with Mr. Mulder.
The Ontario Party believes that part of the reason we have such runaway inflation right now is directly related to our energy costs. Those energy costs have been restricted by lack of supply and by obviously increased demand. The carbon fixation of the governments to try to reduce carbon dioxide output on a worldwide stage, we don't believe is in the economic interests of the people of this province. And obviously there's a differing opinion than others on this platform, but we do believe that it's based in solid logic. When you consider the 10,000 megatons that are emitted every year, Canada's output is 150. And even if we reduce our output by 75, it still makes no impact. So we are going to be facing a carbon-driven climate change, or just a climate change in general, and we need to be prepared for that. Not wasting billions of dollars either ripping out green energy projects or implementing them. Billions of dollars goes a long way. I did some math calculations. In the $13 billion that Doug Ford has promised just recently in the highway and the General Motors thing, that goes towards 10 years salary for, say, PSW. In fact, it goes towards 10 years salaries for 32,500 PSWs. So there is money to be spent, but we can't spend it on projects that are not actually affecting us. So increasing the fuel supply through the pipeline or other transportation from the west to here to ensure Canadian energy for Canadians is one of the biggest things we can do.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Polkermont.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. I know when I'm out knocking doors, whether it be in Almont or Carleton Place or this afternoon when I was in Harrismith, affordability is definitely something that comes up every time I'm out. And gas prices is definitely the number one thing that I hear about. And so the Ontario Liberals are committed to reducing gas prices by 1.7, wanted to make sure I had that number right, 1.7 cents for 6 months starting July 1st for short term. And then really, I do believe that we need to be looking at reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and investing in electric vehicles. And again, the Ontario Liberals have said that we will bring back our incentive program that was in place before 2018, where if you are purchasing an electric vehicle, you can claim $8,000 back, as well as $1,500 to change the outlet that you actually need to be able to charge your vehicle at your home. Other aspects of affordability is increasing ODSP by 20% over 2 years, and seniors' pension, increasing that by $1,000 as well, and raising minimum wage to $16 an hour starting in January 2023. And that's while we develop a living wage, a regional living wage, throughout the province. And bringing back the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot project is also on our list of things to do to help address affordability. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pruitt, if elected, what would you do to make things more affordable for residents in this riding?
So we're probably going to hear some similar comments from the three parties on the left, but we also have a number of incentives to try and make your gas bill decrease at home. So the big cost of energy right now is home heating fuel and vehicles. So there will be energy retrofits for your homes to put new windows in, extra insulation, perhaps even switch to a heat pump, which will give you a cheaper source of heating. Similar to the Liberals, we have incentives for electric vehicles. Ours is a little bit more, 10,000, and actually 5,000 if you got a used electric vehicle. So there's some market there for people who want a more economical and can't afford a brand new vehicle, and actually $1,000 for an electric bike. In addition, we have some commitments to again just implement the basic income. We would do a pilot. We'd start by doubling ODSP and related social service costs to increase the purchasing power of those individuals, and then extend that into entire basic income guarantee.
All right, thank you. Mr. Compson, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. So NDP is set to shift from the cost of everything from individuals to corporations when it comes to what we are doing in terms of green abilities and looking forward to creating those incentives. We also, as the other candidates have said, we do have incentives for electric vehicles as well as retrofits to housing as well. Today, I actually had the opportunity to sit down with Andrea Horvath today in Smith Falls, and we talked about ODSP and OW and how it is not enough. I live on ODSP. It is not enough for anyone. And what I want to make sure is we have fought tooth and nail to convince and make sure that ODSP will first get a 20% increase right away. And also by the end of the year 2 in office, we will have everyone out of legislative poverty with ODSP being doubled and related to inflation. When it comes to what we need to focus on for our seniors, seniors were neglected as well through the pandemic. People with disabilities and seniors were people that were neglected by our governments, no matter what situation they were in, and that has not been okay. Affordability is something that we need to focus on, and we have ways to bring down gas prices. We have ways to make sure that you have incentives to make clean energy and green energy accessible to you at home and in your vehicles. But what we need to make sure is this riding is fast. It isn't anything where you're relying on gas all the time to get from one area to another. And right now the gas prices are unattainable, and it is not fair. We're the ones paying the brunt of the issue here, and that's one thing the NDP will change if we do form government. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Don't be shy if you have any questions, or I'll just keep asking them. Yes. Oh, can I just get you to state your name? And if you do direct it at a particular candidate, they can go first, and I'll just follow the order down the list so the others get a chance. So please, your name and your question.
Absolutely. I am Corinne Jones. I am a mom of 4. I have 2 who, one has actually finished high school, one's in high school, 2 are homeschooled now. My question this time is based on education. So I find it interesting that our Liberal MP has brought up the issues with Conservative MPs, MPPs as the Minister of Education. Because I don't think anybody should forget that the former Liberal Minister of Education, Benjamin Levin, was charged with 3 counts of child pornography. And Benjamin Levin was in charge of the sex ed curriculum that Wynne instituted. And that sex ed curriculum caused immense dismay to my daughter's grade 6 class. It was devastating what these children were taught. I know that there are no children here this evening, and I was shocked when my daughter came home from school and her grade 6 teacher said some things that were extremely upsetting to Evelyn. She came home crying, and leading up to the day.
So your question, Corinne? I know you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's about curriculum, And not only just the sex ed curriculum, but why are we having grade 6 teachers say to a group of students that at one point, all of you will have a man's member in your mouth? That's a grade 6 class, that's at a
Okay.
Catholic school.
Okay,
And
so
as a parent, it's upsetting.
I understand what you're saying. So are you
My
asking?
question is, how is this going to be remedied? Because a lot of things should be left to the parent. So we have curriculums that are.
Okay, I think we got it.
And then math.
Okay.
We need solid math. We have removed so
Thank you.
much and spelling. We have children who can't even spell the word of correctly.
Okay,
So my question is to all the candidates, how is this going to be fixed? We have children who no longer have an education. They have a social period.
okay.
So how is this going to be fixed?
That is a broad subject. Do you want to zero in on curriculum in general or sex ed curriculum?
Well, that's part of curriculum, right? Like that is curriculum, like it's one
Okay.
aspect of it.
All right.
Each candidate can take their own
Sure.
view on it.
Thank you.
But solid curriculum, I'd
Okay.
like to know about that.
We're going to start with Ms. Polker Mock on that one.
So, as a teacher, I do appreciate the feedback, and I am sorry that that's the experience that your daughter had. I do know that when it comes to curriculum creation, it is something that is fluid. You know, things change. I'm thinking of our math curriculum, especially in high school, where like we realized that there was a gap in financial literacy, and so now we've incorporated that into the math curriculum, and there is a lot of thought that goes into it, but I believe in bringing diverse people to the table, and of course teachers are a part of the curriculum development, but I definitely see a place for parents to be around that table as well, and as your MPP, that conversation is something that would be open all the time. That's the job that I'm applying for, is that open communication. So I would sit down with you and listen to specific curriculum concerns that you had, and as your representative, take that back to Queen's Park. With regards to the sex ed curriculum, I do know that in 2018 it was a pretty hot topic. And I do believe that schools should provide some education around sex ed, and we all know with things like social media and the internet, cyber, like that was part of the conversation that was included in the revised sex ed curriculum, but I know that the Conservative government put that on hold, and so I'm just saying that I would be open to feedback from parents, especially on sensitive topics like the sex ed curriculum, and so that we make sure that we are approaching it in a collaborative way. I see the red card. I also know that I got something from my kids' school just this week that I opted out of the sex ed curriculum that they were starting. So.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Pruitt.
Hi, thanks. Curriculum is a complex topic. There's, of course, 12 grades of school and a lot of knowledge that we want to impart to our children as they grow through those years. Our education system is geared to help our children survive and thrive in the world that they're going to engage in. And so we need basic skills like math and reading, but we also need, as Amanda said, financial literacy, understanding the dangers of the internet, and how kids might get led astray, which is also part of the sex ed curriculum. The experience that you refer to doesn't sound to me as if that particular teacher was using all the tools that might have been made available to deal with that module. So when you're trying to talk sex ed, a lot of that new curriculum, teachers were probably uncomfortable, didn't really want to do it, and may not have had the resources that they did. And so I think teachers need to be supported when they have to engage in new areas of discussion that they might not have dealt with before. There is a lot of concern that if children are not aware of some of the issues of sexuality, we're going to end up with problems like baiting them on internet and getting involved inappropriately with older people. And so we need to be able to protect our children from sexual advances, and that's part of the intention of our curriculum. Thanks.
Okay, now we'll turn to Mr. Thompson, the issue of curriculum.
Thank you. In regards to the NDP's platform, we'll amend the Education Act to ensure that there are standards that outline the definition of education on topics like Indigenous history and anti-racism. And these are defined in conjunction with stakeholders, so keeping parents involved and having them have a stake in what we are conversing and making sure they have a voice and being able to present issues like you have presented here today, and that we will listen to you as parents and as family members, and we will make sure that I will make sure when I am your representative at Queen's Park, I will bring these issues forward for our writing. And that is where we are trying to make sure that we are focusing on creating changes for our education system, where we are including parents and all of the stakeholders that take place in our education system to ensure that everyone is represented equally and fairly throughout it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mulder?
Yes, the Ontario Party has some fairly strong policies with respect to curriculum for sex ed and also the gender ideologies that have been promoted very strongly in certain schools. We believe that the primary role of the teachers is to educate, not to indoctrinate. And so we want to make sure that we have best practices for math, sciences, and just make sure that that teaching part is in place. And to remove curricula that's not specifically tailored to that education, but rather that has nuances towards these beliefs around sexuality. We want to make it illegal to be promoting some of these gender ideologies that, for example, that teachers being able to say that men do not exist and women do not exist in separate biological realities. And we want to make sure that if any topic that may be a controversial topic like these ones is going to be taught, that there is adequate notice to the parents before any of this is done. And not only that, it's not just the curriculum that is the issue, but it's these teaching moments that are often used as an excuse to bring in some of these topics. And so we want to make sure that parents are aware of these things, and that there are very strict guidelines to make sure that these are all age-appropriate discussions that the parents are fully aware of.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to our next question now. Yes, sir.
My name is John McDougall, and thank you first of all for being here. We appreciate that. Here in Frontenac County, within the next 2 years, we are going to be losing 5 family doctors. And it's a huge challenge, as you know well, to find those doctors. And I wonder if you've given any thought to how to make it more attractive for them to come to this area.
Great question as well. Okay, going to start with Ms. Pruitt on the issue of the recruit and retain more family doctors.
Well, as a family doctor for 25 years, who worked predominantly in rural areas, I understand completely what the issue is. It's always been a recruitment problem. Things in the north improved with the Northern Ontario School of Medicine because we were training people in the north and they stayed in the north. But it continues to be a problem in a lot of rural areas of the province. So medical school enrollments need to be increased. There were a number of incentives that were put forward in the 90s that actually caused a shift out of the urban areas to the rural areas. And over the last 20, 30 years with the last 2 Liberal and Conservative governments, those incentives have just been eroded. So other urban doctors got the same education grant, they got the same bonus, they got the same extra time, and so now there is no financial incentive to be in a rural area. So we need to replace those. We also need to provide more opportunities for individuals from rural backgrounds to get into medical school because they're more likely to go back to an area that they're familiar with. And we need more training opportunities in rural areas. So if you take a doctor out of a small town, train them in Ottawa for the next 4 years, maybe they don't want to go back to their small town, they're gonna hang out and stay in Ottawa. So we need to find ways to do more of their training, particularly for family physicians, in the communities in which they will later practice. And the Northern Ontario School uses that model in its curriculum, where it actually places its 3rd and 4th year students out in Huntsville or in, not North Bay, New Liskeard, those smaller communities in the north. And so they actually establish relationships with those doctors, with those communities, and are more likely to return.
Okay, thank you, and turning now to Mr. Thompson.
Yes, so healthcare is my biggest priority right now. I got thrown into the healthcare system 11 years ago after suffering a spinal cord injury, and I learned how broken our healthcare system is. And I know growing up in this area, we have struggled for years with family doctors, and I know for a fact that we do not have enough. And our party is promoting that we will provide incentives for all people in the medical field to be able to train in our communities and bring them out into the communities where we need them. Because we can't have people driving an hour to get to a family doctor. That's not okay. That family doctor needs to be local. They need to have a family doctor that is right here in Verona, like we do have with our doctor's office here. And I know my grandma has been going to that doctor's office for the last 60 years, and that is what we need. This is still a part of it, and our incentives bring people into the community and train them and keep them in the community is how we're gonna bring family doctors into the community where it's been neglected, and we have not had the support from any of the parties previously. So it's time for change, and that's what we're guaranteeing to do.
Okay, thank you. Turn now to Mr. Mulder.
Yes, it's certainly a big problem. The doctors need to have support around them in order to be able to thrive. And to take a new graduate from medicine and plunk them into the middle of nowhere is not going to go well. And so we do need to have mentorship programs. We need to have infrastructure availability in our community hospitals as well. At the Ontario Party, we believe that we need to have thousands more nurses and PSWs to support our healthcare system, and we need many, many, many more doctors as well. Part of the way we want to address the doctor shortage is by, as Dr. Spirit, sorry, keep getting that wrong, has mentioned, you know.
Welcome to my club. It's Spruitt.
To get more students into our colleges. If you send our students off to the Caribbean to go to school or to the States, they're likely to stay there. So we need to increase the capacity of our health training, and we need to make sure that it's attractive for these doctors to come to rural practices. So whether that be through online mentorship, whether that be establishing more communities of doctors together, and also increasing the role of nurse practitioners is a big part of how we can serve that. Doctors don't have to do everything. Support nurse practitioners can be a huge component of the rural healthcare setting. So we agree it's a problem, and we have some innovative strategies to solve that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Polker-Mock, what would you do to help recruit and retain family physicians in this region?
So, the first question was about affordability, and I said that's what I hear most about at the doors. Doctors is probably the second one. And it's a problem right across our whole riding. And so the Ontario Liberals plan is to hire 100,000 new doctors, nurses, and allied healthcare professionals. In order to do that, we know that we need to create more spaces in schools for those professionals. In order to attract them to come to rural areas, we will pay their tuition if they commit to coming to our area for a certain amount of time. And so that's one strategy. And my colleagues up here mentioned nurse practitioners. I firmly believe in the nurse practitioner model and believe that is something that will work will work very well in our smaller communities. And so I support that model completely. And one aspect that I think became really evident during the pandemic is the role of the pharmacist. And I know that sort of looking at the scope of practice from a pharmacist side of things, there's also opportunity there to help alleviate some of the pressure that our medical system is facing. And looking at internationally trained professionals, as well as investing in more community health centers. We know that doctors, the day of having a doctor open a practice, a solo practice, are in the past. We know that doctors like to work in teams together with other allied healthcare professionals, and so investing in community health centers is also key to look into the future.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next question, and
I think he was.
sir, you're at the microphone, or are you taking a
I'm
selfie, or
I
what's going on over
am.
there?
I'm live streaming.
You're live streaming.
But I believe this
You're not at
gentleman.
the microphone.
I believe this. Yes, I am. I
Okay.
would like to ask a question, but I think he was first. He was in line first.
Okay, if you don't mind, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So I'd just like to start off with the premise that governments in power generally follow their own legislative and monitoring policy as a starting point. And for me, land and water conservation is extremely important. So I'd like to understand how each of the candidates if elected would be willing to support conservation authorities both legislatively and financially.
Okay, sorry, I didn't get your name at the beginning?
It's Alan Revel.
Al?
Revel.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll start with Mr. Compson on that question.
So when it comes to conservation areas and our watershed, it is important that we as NDPs support them and make them a protected space, because right now the way the conservatives have gone, they've removed all of those protections as what we are dealing with. And we are focused on making sure we implement those protections and make sure that these are safe spaces to continue making sure that our land does not get degraded anymore. And it's our land that we need to focus on, because right now it's our children and grandchildren that are going to pay the price. And as the NDP, we are focused on implementing monetary goals to help build conservation areas up and make sure that conservation areas are able to be supported to protect, especially the wildlife species that we do have in those areas. So that is how the NDP are planning on to focus on creating protections in those areas.
Okay, thank you. Turn now to Mr. Mulder.
Yes, the question of conservation areas is partly a question of jurisdiction and of what they're actually doing. Certainly, we all would agree that conservation areas need to be protected, the environment. We firmly believe in clean air, clean water, clean land policies. And so it's important to preserve the quality of the environment where it is threatened. But the other aspect of it is the jurisdiction. We see sometimes conservation areas focusing more on privately owned land than on the crown land areas. And privately owned land really only represents about 13% of the domain of the conservation areas. And we would like to redirect some of that conservation authorities' efforts towards the crown land and lead to less conflict with landowners and property rights issues in terms of, we've seen where landowners have gotten into trouble for cutting down certain trees and building houses and things like that. So we think that the personal property rights need to be respected, but we also believe that the natural surroundings need to be protected. And so balancing those in a way that is fair for both landowners and our environment is what we need to strike a balance on.
Okay, thank you. On the issue of providing enough support to conservation areas and authorities, Ms. Fulker-Mock.
Yes, thank you for the very important question. And I can't help but think about the conservative government was trying to eliminate conservation authorities, especially in a climate crisis. From a municipal perspective, where my municipal councilor, past municipal councilor hat, I know that the conservation authorities are a resource that municipalities turn to with all land planning. and they're an important resource. They sort of look at the much bigger picture instead of just individual pieces of land. And watershed and flows, like it's a very important role in our community. And so the Ontario Liberals, we've committed currently 10% of Ontario lands are protected lands. We're committed to increasing that to 30%. We would like to expand the green belts, both in, along Toronto and in Ottawa. We've committed to creating 5 new provincial parks. And really, a lot of what we see is urban sprawl, taking over farmland and wetland, and building of highways like the Conservative government would like to do, build a $10 billion highway in Toronto, paving over wetlands and farmland. And so we said we would scrap that highway, and that we really need to look at planning and intensification from a municipal perspective, so that we don't have that urban sprawl, which is creeping into our wetlands and our prime cultural land. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever heard so many ringtones go off at the same time. Is there a deal somewhere that we should know about? Or if you could maybe silence or put your cell phones on silent mode, it helps the candidates focus and me too. Does the Green Party really want to talk about land or water conservation? I don't know, let's find out. Ms. Pruitt, go ahead.
I'm thinking about those ringtones, maybe there's some emergency happening.
There could be, it's just like someone won a lottery somewhere. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so the Green Party would restore the authority that conservation authorities used to have prior to for removing them. Would supports watershed planning as a principle of planning conservation authorities. We would be expanding the green belt similar to the Liberals quite extensively, and also looking at what is referred to as a blue belt, which are a number of watersheds a little bit to the west of the current green belt. Now that probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference to you folks here in Frontenac, because that's on the other side of the 400, but it is a significant area that supplies the water, or it's the source of the water that percolates down through the ground that supplies a lot of Toronto and GTA. So, you know, we've got to keep them fed. We similarly would be limiting urban boundaries to stop the sprawl of cities into rural areas, and would stop the highway expansion of the Bradford and the 413, which is paving over farmland, destroying soil and destroying water. And similarly would be adding more parks. 5 is the initial number that we've also popped forward, and looking at 25% of our land mass would remain protected by 2030, and moving that up to a further 40% by 2040. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Father Anthony Hannon, and one of the surprises I've come across in our society the last couple of years is that the Premier of Ontario is not actually the leader who makes decisions for Ontarians, but rather, or even for our riding, it was not our member of provincial parliament representing us. He did his best, but the ones who are really leading us and making decisions are unelected public health officials. And I would like to ask each of the candidates what their opinion is of Kieran Moore's directives when he was the public health official here in this health unit, and now as the Chief Public Health Officer of Ontario. What is your opinions on his directives? And is there anything you can do, anything your parties can do to restore democracy to our province and our country?
Thank you. So the issue of the power of the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario, especially, I guess, during a pandemic. We'll start with Mr. Lanark.
Well, I think the question is not one of the power of the health officials, but it's the lack of leadership of the Premier. The Premier always had the power. He abdicated his responsibility to these unelected officials. And that's where the problem arises. You need to have, in a situation like a pandemic, it's complex. I'm not trying to say it was an easy thing to deal with. But when you only listen to certain segments of your professional advisors, you're going to make mistakes. And I believe that a large number of mistakes were made. And I think that we need to correct some of those mistakes by making certain policies illegal in the future. One of the things that Dr. Moore mentioned when he was appointed, that he was really impressed with how the lockdowns had suppressed influenza. And maybe we should consider continuing these lockdowns and the like for 2 years to give our medical system a chance to recover. Well, in my understanding of medical science, the lockdowns, they may have worked, but they came at a huge cost. And I think we need to make legislation in place that would virtually eliminate the future of lockdowns in this province.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Polker-Mock.
So elected officials always turn to experts in different fields for advice, whether that be on land, I'm thinking from planning, from building, a whole array of things. And the pandemic was an unprecedented time, and I am so thankful that we had our public health units here. Our riding covers 2 different public health units, and we had great leadership from those public health units when it came to getting information out about COVID, when it came to vaccine clinics. And I know I called them a number of times with questions about COVID. I turned to the experts, I turned to the evidence, I turned to the science when I am making decisions. And I can't imagine making decisions any other way than that. So I do support public health units and the role of the chief medical officer of health in our region and at Ontario level.
Okay, thank you. How about Ms. Pruitt? Do we follow the science, the elected officials, or both?
Like Amanda, the science was there to provide guidance to our government, which made decisions about economic and funding policies. The Health Protection and Promotion Act is a piece of legislation that actually gives authority to your local medical officer of health, so the role that Kieran Moore was in originally when he was here in Kingston. That actually gives them authority to make those decisions about what happens in their local community. So, you know, if there's a oil spill and you need to evacuate your house because it's a risk to all the people around you, they have the authority to give that to you, and that power is given to them in legislation. If you wish them not to have that power, then someone will need to go through their members of parliament and government and change the legislation. The chief medical officer of health has a slightly different role. They have some authority to overrule the local perspective, but they actually have very little to make the decision for the whole province. So decisions about mask mandates, for instance, that happen province-wide, were made at the cabinet table by the Premier and his cabinet on the advice of science table, public health measures table, and any number of medical officers of health that were involved in providing advice. So to say that the Premier didn't make the decisions is not quite correct. The Premier made them, they made them with advice, and I'm glad that we have an open society where our I don't want to say uneducated, our members of parliament who don't have knowledge about a particular topic area are able to turn to experts to get assistance with their policy decisions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gumpson, would you support the status quo or not?
So when it comes to this, I take this very seriously. I am on a ventilator already. I've been on a ventilator for 11 years. And COVID was a scary time for me, especially in the beginning. And I appreciated what was done and the science that was used, especially in the public, in our officer of health, Karen Moore, at an early stage. Our track record was great for the first year, minimal COVID, minimal exposure. And what we need to do is that it is based on science and what the science says. And as someone who has been in this field and healthcare wise, I realized how broken our system was and that it was only the science that was kind of leading it. And it's up to the minister, medical officer of health for Ontario, as well as each individual health unit to be able to make the decisions for their area. And that's one thing that I found was a great opportunity for our area to be successful during the first year of the pandemic. And with that, I say that we need to support everything based on science in terms of our decisions made. I support what was done and that we definitely were taken to a point where the harm was alleviated to our area. And that was up to the decisions that our medical officer of health and table health provided for us.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next question now. Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Auerbach, and I'd like to know what you're going to do to help attract PSWs and nurses to our province and retain them. Every day.
Okay. Another health-related question: to attract more PSWs and nurses to the province, and I would assume this region especially, right? And keep them, yes, attract and retain. We're going to start on that with Ms. Polker-Mott.
And thank you for that question. The retention piece, I think, is incredibly important. I know I was speaking with somebody out in Smith Falls who said she's had 3 family doctors in the same number of years. And so we know that our infrastructure in our smaller communities, has been lacking. We haven't had a strong representative advocating for things like arenas and parks and the types of things that especially young doctors and nurses with families would be looking for if they're going to establish themselves in a community. We need to invest in our communities, and getting them here is one thing, but keeping them here is a whole other piece. And with regards to PSWs, a big piece is covering their tuition to attract them into the profession, but paying them a respectable salary, which helps with attracting them and retaining them. So we've committed to raising PSW wages to $25. And the pandemic shone a big light on how a PSW will work a couple of hours at one facility and then go to somebody's house and then go to somebody else's house and then work at a different facility, trying to piece, enough hours together to live on. And so we're also putting a big emphasis on full-time employment, which will help with recruitment, retention, and with quality of care. I know with my mom, we saw, a rotating door of PSWs, and it's not good. It wasn't good for her. And as a family member, you never knew who was going to be there that day. And so having some consistency, it all comes down to quality of life. And so we need to invest in PSWs and nurses. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Ms. Pruitt?
Thanks for that. So PSWs, registered practical nurses, have all had an extremely difficult time for the last 2 years dealing with COVID and trying to deliver the care the job that they love. They have been called heroes, but treated not like heroes. Bill 124 froze their salaries to 1% annually despite the cost of living. And so they can't bargain if there are unions for higher salaries. PSWs, many of them were making minimum wage. The ones in the home care sector were making less than those in the hospital. So if there was a hospital job free, they were going to move wherever they would get a higher income. Home care PSWs are also not paid for the time they travel between one client and another. So if you're in urban Toronto and you have 5 clients in an apartment building, that's not a lot of downtime. If you're in rural LFK and you have to drive half an hour between one client to the other, that's unpaid time. A number of improvements need to be made to the system. Like the Liberals, we've matched the PSW base salary across all sectors at $25 an hour. They would get paid for their travel time. We would increase the whole budget to home care by 20% because a lot of the PSWs are doing home care work, assisting people and keeping them at home and stopping them from needing a long-term care bed. So if we increase that budget by 20%, we'll be able to pay more of them full-time hours, keep more people at home.
Thank you. Want a drink there before you start, Mr. Constant? Yeah. Take your time. On the issue of attracting and retaining PSWs and nurses, whenever you're ready, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so this is my life daily. I rely on a nurse every morning to help me over. Home care nurses are paid the least out of every nursing position. They are not given fair wages. They are not given the opportunity to have full-time employment where they are able to access things. And that is the main issue. It is a revolving door. I have nurses in and out. Maybe they'll visit once, maybe they'll visit 10 times, and then they're gone from the company. And that is a big issue. Nurses are trying to get that. I also rely on PSWs 24/7 a day. They are there as my backbone. This is what healthcare is. And our home care sector is failing, and it needs to be better funded, which we are planning to do. We are also planning on making sure that we hire more nurses and PSWs to make sure that there is adequate PSW care in long-term care, but also making sure that home care is the prime suspect when we focus on funding, because it is up to the home care sector to be able to help keep our seniors in their home for longer and not have them go into a long-term care home where they're not going to get the support that they necessarily need. And that's where we as a riding need to be able to provide PSWs and nurses with adequate spaces in the riding that will allow them to have more community reach and make sure they are supportive along every aspect of things. And right now, as we have learned, people are going from house to house or job to job because they need a number of hours to stay afloat, and that means sometimes 2 or 3 jobs. And that has been one of the main things that we are focused on, is increasing the wages of PSWs. And Ford promised that he was going to give the $3 an hour wage increase permanent, but that never happened under Ford. He failed that. He has left it in bingo, and I was getting it every time there was supposed to be a change. My staff would go down to minimum wage, which is not fair to my staff. So it is up to us as the NDP to make those changes. And as someone who relies on our healthcare system, PSWs and nurses, I will fight for them every step of the way and be their voice at Queen's Park.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mulder?
Yeah, I mean, I echo those concerns. The fact that the people who have hands on our bodies are paid the least shows one of the fundamental problems in our healthcare system. It's a healthcare system that I wish the Conservative members were here so I could kind of push the blame on both Liberals and the Conservatives, because the healthcare system that we have today has been built for many, many years. Both Liberal and Conservative governments have neglected our healthcare system all around, and we have a top-heavy bureaucratic system that even on good days has bed shortages, emergency gridlock, and poor long-term care. So we need a massive shakeup in our healthcare system and respect the nurses and PSWs who are caring for our most vulnerable people, and pay them accordingly and give them the honor of that position. So I think it's a huge problem that our healthcare system has to be reworked to make sure that the people who are caring are being respected and paid correctly. And I agree, Bill 124, capping the wages and then giving a $5,000 bonus to try to make people feel better, it doesn't address the fundamental issue. I know of nurses who showed up on their shift in hospitals even, where they've now had twice as many patients to look after, and what are they gonna do? They can't go home and say, sorry, I'm only gonna look after the ones that I was planned for. They're gonna do their best. But after my own surgery, I was admitted for pain control, monitoring because it was so painful after the surgery. I got one treatment because the nurse was run off her feet. So it's in hospitals, it's in PSWs, it's in people's homes getting support. The people who are doing the caring have been one arm behind their back, and that has to change.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next question, please.
My name is Marcus.
Marcus? Okay, go ahead, Marcus.
My question is to the candidates, what is your position on digital ID? Just because we've seen that, if the government doesn't agree with you, they can turn off your bank account if you're a family member that's given, $10 to some truckers. And my concern is that now the provincial government is moving forward on digital ID. At least that's been their plan, and they already have things in play already in conjunction with Air Canada and the Kingston Airport and Trudeau Airport. They have things already set up for digital ID, and then of course, that leads us to digital currencies. I know that's of course not a provincial matter, but still the digital ID is a plan that's being moved forward now. My concern is about the protection of people's rights concerning that, putting your medical records with the digital ID. Is that going to be safe? And is the government going to turn you off if they don't like what you're saying or what you're doing?
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Ms. Pruitt. I guess on the issue of privacy rights with this digital ID system.
We have privacy legislation in place, and that restricts the use of any healthcare information, sharing with anybody other than a healthcare provider. So we currently already have digital ID. I mean, your driver's license is digital, it can be scanned. Your passport is digital and it's scanned. So there is data on you already. There is no intent from the Green Party to do anything beyond that basic information, to collect that information about licenses and pieces of information that you already have. And we don't have banking authority to freeze your bank account, so that would not, that's just not even in the scope of this discussion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson?
I agree with Ms. Sprout on this as well. It is a situation where it is not up to us to make those decisions, and obviously privacy policies are in place, and we are focused on maintaining privacy. And your health records are available to you and your family physicians or medical personnel only, and there is strict laws in regards to sharing any medical information, and that we are not able to access it and make sure that people with these digital IDs, it's still in a situation where it's not a provincial legislation right now.
Okay, the truth is out there, Mr. Mulder.
Indeed. Well, the truth is that I don't trust governments to do what they say they're going to do. I mean, last time I paid a buck a beer was long before Doug Ford came along, and he promised that and he didn't deliver. There's many other things that Doug has promised and hasn't delivered on. And he's also said last summer that the COVID vaccine would be voluntary. And on the website, on the digital ID, that too will be voluntary. And my concern is it will be voluntary in the same way that the vaccine was voluntary. That yes, you can do it if you want to, but if you don't, we'll take so many things away from you. So I'm opposed to digital ID. Our party is opposed to digital ID for both the trust factor and the fact that when I traveled around for a number of years, I would keep my passport in one pocket, credit cards in another pocket, my traveler's checks and a belt around my belly. Shows the whole damn. But the idea is that you didn't put all your valuables in one spot, and certainly you wouldn't put all your valuables into the safe in the hotel room where somebody could break into it. And so we're putting all that information together on the internet and trusting our government to look after that, and trusting our government to be true to their word. And unfortunately, our politicians haven't got a good track record of being true to their word. So digital ID in terms of having a safer online environment, I'm all for that. I don't want to have bank fraud any more than anybody else. But I just don't like the idea of the government saying, trust me with all your information, we'll put it all in one place and we'll look after you. Not my thing.
Travelers checks? Ms. Polkerbach.
Oh, there you are. So thank you for your question. You mentioned medical records, and I have to say that there were lots of issues with my mom going through the healthcare system, but one of them was having to repeat our story to every single specialist that we saw. And it was at a time when we didn't have, well, we were transitioning, I guess, into electronic medical records. And so once we saw the transition, it made communication between specialists a lot more streamlined, a lot easier. By the time we arrived at an appointment, all of the information was there. I wasn't having to go to one doctor to another doctor to get photocopies of records to keep track of, from a patient perspective, which is the liberal standpoint, patient-centered care, an electronic medical record, if you have complex medical needs, is a very valuable tool for the patient and for the families. And like Marlene mentioned, there are very strict rules around privacy and who can access that information. I know the government takes your privacy very, very seriously, medical privacy incredibly seriously. Directly from the Ontario Liberal platform, I can say that we are committed to modernizing privacy, data, and intellectual property laws. Whereas as for the specifics, I would have to direct you to our platform, which is available on the Ontario Liberal Party website, and you can read up more on what that actually would result in.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Yes, sir, I know you've been waiting patiently there.
My name's Doug Lovegrove. A little bit of a background. I'm a senior. I have medical problems, and I've been granted to the opportunity to take my 4th dose. Unfortunately, when I go to my 4 medical appointments a week, I go to people that can't get the 4th dose. My daughter's a PSW, and she cannot get it. But she has to work with seniors and in a medical home, and she is less protected than I am. This is not fair. You say you're going to hire more, you're going to pay them more, let's protect them more. So how would your parties protect the PSW, all medical workers?
All right, we'll start with Mr. Counselor.
Well, thank you for that, and I understand the struggle. I was not eligible for my first dose of the vaccine when I am, because of my age. Even though I had a severe disability and I'm on a ventilator, I was not given the opportunity to get my first dose. And every dose since then has been a struggle. And it's where we did not support the people that needed it. There was an age-based system, obviously, and disabled people were left out. Disabled people were not able to get their doses of vaccine no matter what age group they were. I was actually in the hospital back in March, and that is when I got my first dose of the vaccine while I was surrounded by COVID patients. And that was one of the big struggles. And that is where we need to be able to support every person that is in the healthcare field, that is working with our seniors, the vulnerable population that they are, because right now, that's where our spread is, and they are the ones that we need to protect. And people with disabilities are also the people that need to be protected, for sure, and that has been an issue. I had to get, for my 3rd dose, I had to get an infectious disease doctor to write a letter in recommendation that I was requiring a 3rd dose of the vaccine because of my situation. And that was not fair. It's not fair to anyone that they cannot have access to a dose when they are trying to do the tireless work of working with those seniors every day of their life. And the only way we can protect everyone is to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to have the vaccines that they want to have, and that it's available to them when they need it and are eligible to get it. So that is one of the main things for me, as someone who has struggled with it as well, that it is time that there needs to be changes made to the system.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mulder, what steps would you take to further protect all medical workers?
I believe it's really important that an individual and their doctor are able to make medical decisions that benefit that individual. I think when we've had politicization of medicine, that's where we have a lot of problems. And so if an individual desires a second, third, or fourth, or fifth vaccine, they should have that available to them. If an individual decides not to have a vaccine, that should be an individual's decision. And my own doctor was not able to make a recommendation for me except for the one that was directed. And so for me, with my autoimmune condition, I was reluctant to take a vaccine because I wanted to see medical evidence whether it would be supported or not. My doctor had to make the recommendation that I get the vaccine or they might lose their license. So the whole politicization of decision-making, it needs to be handed back to the individual and their medical practitioner to decide what's right for them, and then get 1, 10, or none, whatever the doctor decides for that patient. And we need to have that autonomy. And this illustrates the problem of handing off things to a government to look after things for us. They are not going to do as good a job as an individual doctor and their patient together. So hands off my medical decisions and let a nurse practitioner, let the doctor decide for a PSW or an individual to get the health care that they need for protection in a high-risk situation or protection in a low-risk situation.
Great, thank you. Ms. Polkerbach?
So thank you for your question, and I think it's really important that we do take the health and safety, especially those frontline workers, very seriously, especially when I keep reading in the paper about long-term care homes in Kingston that are still on COVID outbreaks. And so I do believe that we need to be getting, fourth doses to those frontline healthcare workers. I'm really curious to hear what Marlene has to say on this matter. Maybe I was hoping that she was going to go before me, because this is not an area of expertise on my part. I don't know what the logics or, why you would deny a frontline healthcare worker a dose if they were wanting that dose. I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's unfortunate because PSWs, PSWs and nurses were definitely at the forefront of the pandemic, and the care that they give is invaluable. And so why wouldn't we be wanting to protect them to the best of our ability? And if you have somebody who's willing to get a fourth shot, why I don't have an answer for you.
Well, you set it up nicely then, as we turn to Ms. Pruitt for an explanation and a solution.
It's complex, to say that. And there's two phases, right? At the very beginning, when we had almost no vaccine, we really had to try and give it to those who would benefit most first. I mean, that's just an ethical decision, not a medical decision. I agree with Thomas that most medical decisions should be made between you and your medical provider. With respect to the COVID vaccine, when it came out, most of the medical providers were phoning public health because they didn't know enough about it to actually make those decisions with their patients. And so it sort of went up to a higher level of decision making. Now that we have plenty of vaccine, the requirement to restrict it is less based on science and some of it based on economics. So if we let everyone have everything that they want, as opposed to what they need, we will have incredibly big tax bills, right? So I agree that the physician and the patient should decide what they what's needed, but sometimes people want things that actually aren't going to be helpful. Some people want a chest x-ray every year when they come in for a physical, it's not even gonna do them any benefit. So some of the guidelines that are set out for vaccines are based on the fact that elderly people, the vaccine works less effectively for them, so they need more boosters than younger people. Some people with autoimmune conditions may not respond to the vaccine, but they need it more, so they should be offered it. And so as we roll out these policies, and the world is constantly changing, the policies have to keep changing, and currently they should be in a state where everyone who will benefit from vaccine will get it, but there's always going to be exceptions that fall through the cracks, like through where the physician has to speak to their condition, and then they usually do get the shot, as happened with him. Did I get that in time?
Thank you, doctor. By the way, you taking on any new patients? Just wondering.
Clinically anymore.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Yes, far microphone there.
Again. So my next question is the fiscal responsibility, and I find it interesting that you brought up, again, liberal, but also Green Party, financial literacy in school, because that's my question for the government right now, is where is the financial literacy when it comes to increasing minimum wage and trying to get in a universal basic income and providing so many, rebates that you could claim on your taxes for this or that, when that is going to propagate the cycle, especially things like inflation is constantly affected by income. So if we increase income yet again, every single product on every single store shelf goes up. It has to go up, because no matter how many people say we want the businesses to take a cut, well, the businesses aren't going to take a cut. So where is the financial literacy of the sitting MPPs who can say, oh no, we'll put income up again, but then that won't affect anything? So how?
Whoa, you're really throwing a lot out there. Do you have can you break it down into one question here?
Yeah,
for
it is
us?
one question. It is one question. How can you say that increasing all of these things does not cause inflation, right? Because this is the issue. We've got a rampant inflation problem. So how can you say for the platform we're going to raise wages, but it will not affect inflation?
Okay.
Okay?
So it's the old spend like a drunken sailor routine? Is that they're promising billions in spending but no fiscal responsibility?
How I see the liberal and the green party.
Okay. Okay. I gotta.
Have some explanation as to
Sure.
how.
Thank you.
They think that
Thank you.
things are still going to stay somewhat balanced in the favor of the pockets of the people.
Right. How are you going to address our growing debt, I guess, and fiscal accountability, fiscal responsibility in your platforms, right? I'm gonna start with Mr. Mulder.
Well, that is one of the firm planks of our policy, is that we believe we are a truly conservative party, and would say that fiscal responsibility is something that government should be focused on. If we're charging too many taxes, we'll have excess money in our budgets, and if we're spending too much, we'll have deficits. And we have seen with both liberal and conservative governments, huge amounts of increases in debt. They're spending so much in interest that we can't spend that money on healthcare and nurses and in education. So fiscal responsibility is a key principle. We can't borrow our grandchildren's money and use it for today. So live within our means and go from there. As far as inflation goes, I mean, my son was an example of that. We had to go through all kinds of swimming lessons to become a lifeguard. And so he got his job as a lifeguard, and then when they increased the minimum wage, he could make, I think it was 25 cents a dollar less if he was working at Tim Hortons than as a lifeguard. And so they had a hard time getting lifeguards. Imagine that. So I think the more we interfere with our economy in the effort to sound like we're being compassionate to people by giving them more money, we're taking money out of their pockets through inflation. So I agree with you. less interference with the economy is actually better for us all. And it's the more compassionate approach, and regardless of how good it might sound on the surface, it just doesn't deliver in the end.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Polker-Mock on the issue of fiscal responsibility and accountability.
And so I am proud to say that the Ontario Liberal Plan is fully costed, and that complete document is found on our Ontario Liberal Party website along with our platform. So if you are looking for more specific information about where the money is going and how much things are going to cost, it is all there for you to go and look at. We have committed to balancing the budget in 2026, 2027, and our spending is actually on par with the Conservatives, with the budget that they've proposed. But we make very different investments. And so, for example, the four Conservatives wanted to spend $10 billion on building a highway in Toronto that will pave over wetlands and prime agricultural land, whereas the Ontario Liberals have said, we're going to take that $10 billion and invest it in our healthcare, our education system across Ontario. We know that we need to build more schools. We know that we have aging schools. Part of the education commitment is also looking at how those schools are funded, realizing that rural schools, you can't apply the same funding formula for urban schools and cities that you can to rural schools. And so we're committed to looking at the funding formula for education. And really our platform is about investing in people, not just building highways. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brewer?
Thanks for the question. There's two different issues at point here. One is inflation and the other one is government budgets. And they're two different things. So inflation is only minimally affected by what governments do. It's really a thing in terms of what's going on in the world at large, the war in the Ukraine, the shortage of gas, supply and demand. And governments can do a little bit to stimulate or to stop that, but they don't actually drive inflation by itself. So with respect to fiscal accountability, that's the budget that the government has to spend, which is your tax dollars that come in through various means. And like the Liberals, we have a fully costed platform. We have just decided on different priorities than some of the other parties. And so when we speak about taking people out of poverty and giving them a universal basic income, that's going to happen because there are going to be savings elsewhere. So poverty costs us, as a government in this province, $33 billion. People in poverty who are homeless, who don't have adequate food, use the healthcare system disproportionately more. So they're in the emergency room, they're admitted to hospital. If we bring them out of poverty and deal with their mental health problems, they are less likely to be using expensive healthcare resources. Similarly, more people in poverty are in the judicial system, in our courts, because they got picked up for sleeping on the street because they didn't have a house. And so bringing them out of poverty, we will save things in other parts of our budget. And in addition, we wouldn't be building highways and some of the things that we think are not as beneficial to our population at large.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so the NDP also has a fully costed platform out now, and it is important to realize that 87 of the richest Canadians in the country make the same amount as 12 million of the lowest earning Canadians, and that is not okay. So what we are proposing with the NDP is that we're going to tax those rich people and make sure that they are increasing their taxes while making sure that we don't increase the taxes of the everyday person, because it is not up to everyone else that is making bare minimums to get by to be able to actually take the opportunity and take money away from them. So it's time that we tax the rich in terms of making sure that those 87 Canadians that are making more than 12 million Ontarians and Canadians combined are the ones that are paying for what we need. And that's where our platform is focused on creating those changes and making sure that we are not only supporting low-income families and medium-income families, that the taxes are not going to go up for the everyday Ontarian. The taxes are going to be put up on those 87 Ontarians and Canadians that are making that money. And that's what we are planning to do as the NDP.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Yeah, go ahead. Come on up to the microphone there and what's your name, please?
Darcy Snyder. I'm a farmer. A 58th spring plant. I represent less than 1% of the population of Canada. I got a lot to say. It's guys like me that you people live, not the healthcare system. Food should be number one. I disgusted at the fact that agriculture was not even mentioned across that table. You want affordable food. Tell me, how are you going to make affordable food? You can't. You don't even know our costs. Not one government member will stand up and say, we will support the farmers for input to 2022. The Liberal government last fall, Justin Trudeau, Kirsty Freeland laughed at the fact that we wanted support for fertilizer to hold our costs on spring planting. Last year, we paid $500 a metric ton for fertilizer. This year, we were faced with $1,200 a ton, and with the Ukraine war, we had a 35% tariff on top of the $1,200. We pay $1,650 a ton. It does 10 acres. We got 500 of them. Do the math.
Darcy, thank you. We understand your frustration.
Just a minute. They need to be educated.
Well, they're candidates, they're not elected officials,
You
so,
gotta have the premise of affordable food.
okay. I think they get it though. You said it very eloquently.
How they're gonna make
Okay.
affordable food.
Well, let's
with
let
all
them,
these costs,
yeah,
nobody supports it.
we get it. And it's a great point, Darcy, thank you, and thank you for being a farmer. We do support,
I love it.
yeah. And the issue of food security and supporting the agricultural sector in this province, okay? Let's get some answers then. Let's start with Ms. Polker-Mock.
Yes, and thank you for the work that you do. I think the pandemic shone a light on lots of things, but I think one of those lights was on local. You know, like we really need to get back to our roots and support local. And it is farmers that feed us, which is why we're focused on protecting the farmland as to start with, and we're committed to increasing the carbon tax rebate to farmers and involving farmers in, and I want to get this in a climate action plan that's specific to rural Ontario. Farmers need to have a seat at that table. To make sure that your voices are heard when we're talking about the climate crisis and our plan forward. So we're committed to doing that. We've also said that we will invest in abattoirs and take on mega companies and legislate fair and open negotiations between retailers and suppliers, and so that our local farmers can get into local markets instead of so much reliance on imports. And so we're saying that we'll take on the big grocers and say, no, we want to support local, we want you to carry more local more local food overall. Or I already said, invest in abattoirs and preserve farmlands, and the right to repair. That was the other piece that I recently learned about in conversations with farmers, is the right to repair your equipment. And my understanding is that some farming manufacturers say that you can only go back to that manufacturer to repair your equipment, whereas
Policy with John Deere.
so we're saying that we would tackle that.
Thank you.
Because it's your right to repair your own.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. We're gonna turn now to Ms. Pruitt.
Yeah, thank you for the work that you do, and you're right, farmers feed us and keep us alive, along with clean water and clean air. We've talked a couple of times indirectly about farming, as we mentioned, I think several times, that we don't want to farm over our pave over our farms with highways. We've also said that we don't think that we want our cities to expand, and the best crop that a farmer can grow is a crop of houses. We need to keep our valuable farmland that feeds us active and working. The current situation with the war in Ukraine has messed up gas prices and messed up fertilizer prices really quite significantly. And we need to look at special programs for those unique circumstances. I think we can't, that just needs to, there needs to be some sort of supplement to deal with that. And I also understand there's just gonna be a shortage of it generally, and so that's gonna affect all of our food prices going forward. Similar to the Liberals, we have plans to provide incentives for farmers, a better insurance, better crop insurance that's more reliable. We understand that some of the insurance companies don't even want to insure you anymore because things are too risky. Climate change is going to make some of those costs worse. There's going to be perhaps longer droughts, heat waves, unpredictable weather, rainstorms, hailstorms that are also going to affect your crops and make our food more expensive. And we need to sit down with farmers and figure out good solutions for all of those things. We also have a plan to give incentives to local businesses that use local farming products. So if there's a local brewery that gets its hops locally, they'll be encouraged to do so by getting kinds of rebates. And that will again encourage us not to ship our food around, but to keep it local. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Compson?
Yes, thanks, Percy, I appreciate the question, and it is very, you're in the Sydenham area, right? Yeah, and so it's definitely one thing that we as an NP are focused on, especially with the increase in the issues when it comes to what has happened in terms of fertilizer prices, is providing subsidies to farmers to help offset the cost of fertilizer and make sure that the farmer is not bearing the brunt of the costs. And that those are the ways we are supporting farmers, because it's our local farmers that are keeping food in our area, and we need to make sure that local farmers are supported and that family farms are supported. Family farms are a backbone in our community, and it's up to the family farms to help provide us with everyday foods. And that's what our family farms do on a regular basis. And it's something that we are focused on, trying to help farmers in a way that we are able to support them, especially with these high costs, not only in fuel, but also in fertilizer, because obviously both of those have a major effect. Whether it is the fuel prices to plant your seeds, to harvest your crops, to access all of the things you need, that also has a major impact. And we have a plan to bring down fuel prices as well. And that's one of the things that as a community, we rely on you and on your support and making sure that we are able to have food on our tables. And I appreciate everything you do. And I hear what you're saying.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mulder?
It's such a complex thing. I grew up on a farm, so I can totally understand your frustrations. Ultimately, the problem is the energy costs in all of this. So whether it be the cost of diesel fuel, the cost of the energy going into fertilizer, with all the talk of green energy and such like that, you cannot make some of these fertilizers with electricity. You need to have fossil fuels to go into some of these things. Farmers who have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into tractors are not gonna invest millions of dollars into battery operated tractors to pull their stuff around. It just isn't gonna happen. We have a dependence on fossil fuels, and that's not gonna end, and it's not gonna be the end of the world. Currently, Canada's output is 151 metric tons of carbon to a 10,000 worldwide level, which China has already been given a pass to increase their outputs by 3% a year. So in a year and a half, China's output is going to eclipse our entire output in Canada. So everything we're doing that's trying to shut down our carbon footprint and strangling farmers and other people dependent on fossil fuels is not going to make a difference in the climate. It really isn't. It's just a drip in the bucket. So we need to support farmers. One of our party's platforms is to remove the PST from fuel, which today would drop the price of fuel by 16 cents, not 1.6 cents, 16 cents. And so if we as governments commit to supporting our population, we can make a big difference. And so as the Ontario Party, we believe in farmers. We think that the issues of property rights affect you guys much more than average homeowners, and we want to support you in that as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you again, Darcy, for the question and raising that very important point in this election campaign. All right, let's turn over to this gentleman at the microphone here closest to you.
My name is Thomas Wheatley. I have a question for Mr. Mulder specifically, or any other candidate who would like to comment on that. In your opening statement, you mentioned that your party will work against foreign interference into our politics. And in that connection, you mentioned specifically the World Economic Forum. Could you just briefly explain what the World Economic Forum does and how it interferes or would likely interfere into Canadian or Ontario politics?
People are not aware.
Hang on, I don't recognize you. Okay, all candidates, this was directed at Mr. Mulder, of course, but you'll at least get a chance if you want to add something more to the foreign interference in Canadian Ontario politics issue. Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Mulder.
Sorry, I'm eager to speak to that issue. The World Economic Forum has a very open agenda that anybody can look at on their website. And ultimately, its goals are a very socialist mindset where property ownership is not high priority, and the whole climate crisis is a big part of that. Doug Ford has connections to the World Economic Forum, as does Justin Trudeau and Christy Phelan, and many others in our government who have either associations with or direct positions with. How much interference do they have is the question that nobody wants to answer. And I would like to ask Doug how many of his policies were directly affected by his involvement with the WEF and how many were because of what he truly believed himself. And so I'm concerned when I see an organization whose goal is to eliminate national borders having any influence within our national border. And it's all behind the scenes. Nobody is being totally upfront about how much influence they actually have. But if you read their policies, they're not compatible with the Canada that I grew up in. And I would like to see any kind of influence that they may have stopped.
Thank you. Ms. Walter-Mott?
Yeah, so I have been out knocking doors for months now, and I have to say that specific question has not come up. So I would like to take this opportunity to talk about something that we haven't talked about yet today, which is housing. And so when I'm out knocking doors, I hear about people who are really concerned about the cost of housing, people who have kids who are trying to buy houses and who can't get into the market, and people who are renting who can't afford the rent in their houses anymore. This is something that I hear all the time when I'm out knocking doors. And so the Ontario Liberal Plan is that we would re-implement rent control. And we're committed to building 1.5 million homes over 10 years. In order to make this happen, we know that we really do have to work with municipalities, and that we would create a Ontario Home Building Corporation to help expedite the process. And part of building all of these homes too is job creation. Although with job creation, we estimate that we'd be creating 150,000 jobs, but we know that trades, we need more skilled trades workers in Ontario. So there is a piece about offering a $2,000 incentive for people who go into the trades, and it's those people who are going to, really build up Ontario quite literally. We're going to end exclusionary zoning and tax homes that are currently sitting empty. That's another piece that I hear about often. And ban new non-resident ownership, as well as promote a housing first model to ending chronic homelessness. Thank you.
Candidates, I'm going to allow you to wander off topic for this one time only, okay? Because that was a specific question to one candidate, okay? If you didn't have anything to add to that answer, you should have just said so, okay? But that was my fault. I should have said that sooner. So we'll continue on then. Ms. Pruitt, let's wander off topic if you want.
I commend Amanda for taking that opportunity. But I will touch a little bit on foreign interference and the World Economic Forum, which is a forum. It has no legal authority over our country. People go there, they talk, they discuss, they come back with ideas, maybe they influence how they make future decisions. Like many conferences that any of us may have attended, we get ideas, we apply them globally. We live in a global economic situation. We cannot exist independently of other global markets, and so there will always have to be relationships with foreign suppliers. That said, in the recent pandemic, we realized that there were a few areas where we really need to be much more self-sufficient. So when we ran out of PPE because it all came from the US, we realized we needed to manufacture more of that at home. We've got, most of this is a federal issue, so I'm really just touching on it briefly. It's not necessarily provincial. Vaccine manufacturing was the other issue. We were getting all our vaccines and we weren't getting them as quickly as the Americans because we were getting them from overseas. We've now developed and are building a vaccine production facility in Quebec. So I think that when we do future pandemic planning for the country and the province, we need to look at all the things that are critically important to us, and fuel is one, protection equipment is another, vaccines may be another, and there's got to be other ideas. We need to be creative and develop that list and say, what is it that we really need to be self-sufficient on? We need to be able to feed ourselves and not dependent from it all coming abroad. And what can we manage without and share with partners? So that needs to be part of our overall planning, and I don't think it has until this point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson.
I don't really have much to say on this and would just like to leave it.
Anything else you want to get off your mind here? You're good?
Right now.
You had the opportunity. Amanda took it. Okay, this is going to be our last question. Time is running short, and we coincidentally only have one person left in the microphone before we move to closing statements, the far microphone. Go ahead, please.
My name is Mary O'Connor, and there's a lot of discussion tonight about both patient privacy rights and also the freedom to choose medical treatment. So I have been a physician for 50 years actually, and I had a number of patients who had exemptions because they did not want medical treatment that had been suggested to them, or it was actually coerced for them to take because it was a job.
A little closer to the microphone, Mary.
So,
Thank you.
sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So my questions then are about privacy rights for patients and for their freedom to choose their treatment they want.
Does that, okay, does that?
So my question is then, I'd like the candidates to answer me, do they truly believe that patients have the right to choose their own treatment without being coerced and losing their jobs? One of the nursing problems is that many of the nurses lost their jobs because they refused to get vaccination. It's been a huge problem and all that. And secondly, privacy rights, because the college physicians and surgeons demanded to know who I've written exemptions for and demanded to see their charts, which I refused. So again, this is privacy rights, which have nothing to do with medical treatment, other than writing an exemption for treatment. So thank you very much, I just appreciate it.
Thanks, Mary.
And
Okay, so, kind of a broad topic, patient rights to choose treatment, even in a pandemic, and also patient privacy rights. We'll start with Mr. Thompson.
Thank you for the question, I really appreciate it, and definitely it should be up to a patient what they choose. As someone who has been a patient now for 11 years, I have had to make my own decisions on my own healthcare, and it should be up to the patient when they are wanting to take whatever they want to do in terms of their own health. And it is a spot where it obviously some of what happened in the last 2 years has definitely crossed lines that may not have been what people are really trying to make sure that they have the support of their physicians, and also be able to have that patient privacy, because it is about patient privacy. We, as someone, as a patient, like, privacy is very important, and it is something that is part of our legal framework, and it's time to make sure that patients do have those rights to choose, and that is where I think overall, yes, the pandemic has definitely taken away some of those rights for people to choose, but it has also come up with a situation where we have learned from mistakes that have been made and how to go about it further on. The pandemic has been a whole learning process. No one has had a handbook on how to deal with the pandemic, and that is something that we have learned throughout this time. And so I think the privacy and the patient aspects of it is important, and that you should not have to share all of the things that you need to do on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mulder?
Yes, I feel very passionately on this subject. Whether or not the vaccine was effective in the claim of stopping transmission, which very early on the research did not support. So regardless of whether that claim would be true or not, to go from there to now forcing people to take a vaccine with decisions being made by elected officials who don't have necessary medical training, I think has crossed a line that if we do not uncross, that does not bode well for our society. The freedom for an individual to decide medical treatments is of paramount importance, and then also the confidentiality of medical records. Again, why has this been done? The vaccine did not stop transmission, so me getting the vaccine would not help anybody else. It would help me and maybe reduce weight on our healthcare system. But that should not have been enough to force people. I spoke to people who have reluctantly taken the vaccine because not only were they going to be let go from their job, but all of the money that was in their pension, the employer part of that was going to be taken away, and they were not eligible for employment insurance. That's coercion, that is extortion, that is not legally right. In fact, Justin Trudeau, when he ran in the last election, he promised to help people, employers, in case they faced legal challenges. So he knew it was illegal to do that, and Doug Ford and our government supported that all the way along. It's just criminal. It really is wrong to violate those individual rights, and we as a party would make that enshrined in a as much law as we can in Ontario to prevent that from happening.
Well, how do you really feel? Okay, let's move on to Ms. Polkerbach.
So I am just gonna lay it all out there. I am in support of vaccine mandates. I believe that we are coming out of this pandemic because people have rolled up their sleeves and taken the vaccine. I know that there are people working with vulnerable citizens, vulnerable people in our communities, and I felt that it was. I feel it's no longer just about me, but it's about us as a community and stepping up and protecting each other. And the strain, we all talked about the healthcare system and the strain that the pandemic put on our healthcare system. And if it wasn't for things like vaccines, the healthcare system would have been overrun. And I remember, I can't remember which phase it was, but where we were starting to talk about triaging people when they went to the hospitals because there weren't enough beds, there wasn't enough staff. And if those of us didn't roll up our sleeves and get protected, I really believe that we would not be where we are today. Finally, coming out of the pandemic and looking to the future, and the next government that we elect will set the next 4 years up for Ontarians for success. And the Ontario Liberals really believe in building us back when it comes to jobs and when it comes to building up our rural communities and investing in people. That's what government is about, investing in people. And yeah, I am fully vaccinated and my kids are fully vaccinated. And I feel it's really important to roll up your sleeves and get vaccinated since we're getting out of this.
Ms. Pruitt?
Thanks. So everyone has the right to decide what treatment they choose. There may sometimes be consequences for the decisions that you make. Everyone has the right, when they're treated in a hospital, to be as safe as they can expect to be, and know that the individuals that are providing care for them are not creating a greater risk to that individual in a hospital or who's providing home care. Everyone who works in a facility as an employee has an expectation that their employer will provide a safe working environment. So those are sort of three situations, and sometimes they come to conflict. So if I choose not to be vaccinated, I may be exposing that patient that I care for in the hospital to a greater risk. If I choose not to be vaccinated, my coworker who expects to be given a safe work environment may actually be suing the employer because the employer didn't require me to get vaccinated. So the whole thing was very complicated. Most employers provided accommodation and alternate work for employees that chose not to get vaccinated and tried it, and there were very, very few people that were outrightly fired. Most of them were accommodated, particularly if there was a union involved.
Wow.
And like Amanda, we all stepped up and got vaccinated because even though the vaccine wasn't 100% perfect, it did reduce transmission and it did reduce the severity of the disease you got, so that if you did catch COVID, you were less likely to be hospitalized and have less of an impact on the hospital system. So again, I commend any of you here who did get vaccinated, and it was something that we all did for each other. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we've come to the closing statements now. Your last chance there to get your messages out, candidates. 1 minute for the closing statement. And we're going to do it in reverse order. We're going to start. Get the papers ready there. We're going to start with Ms. Pruitt. Go ahead.
Heard a lot of comments tonight. Most of us have said that we want to do things that improve our ability to have a caring society, that we want to take people out of poverty, that we want to make farmers more able to farm, that we want to get things locally. There's a lot of commonality at the table today. Unfortunately, the party that's in power has chosen not to be here and, or is not able to be here. And so we can't hear the difference of opinion and how, their plans, their perspective may be different. I have heard that they think that they can build their way out of, the cost of living. So the biggest issue that I hear is cost of living. And the Conservatives think that if you build a bunch of highways, that's gonna make our cost of living lower. I can't figure out the logic there at all. It may make life better for construction workers and the companies and the shareholders that run construction companies, but it's not gonna fix my food bill or my gas bill. So we have other ideas, and so you've heard a variety of them, some of them quite similar, but I hope that you'll choose something that resonates with your plans for what you want your Ontario to look like as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Polker-Mock, 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you so much to the Teachers Union for hosting tonight, and to Bill, and to my colleagues who are up here on stage with me. It's not easy to put your name on a ballot and, attend things like this, so kudos to you guys as well. This election is really about priorities. Building highways in Toronto or investing in education. Privatizing healthcare or investing in publicly funded healthcare and transforming how we care for our elders. Protecting big business or investing in the talent and people right here in Ontario. I'm running because I'm a community leader who believes in listening and bringing people together. I believe in collaboration and working towards consensus. I believe in investing in people. Priorities matter. Choices matter. 2018 was an anomaly for the Liberals, and the NDP didn't take a single seat from a Conservative. Liberals are the only ones who beat Conservatives. If you don't want 4 more years of Ford, on June 2nd, vote Liberal, vote Amanda Polker-Mock. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mulder?
We've heard a number of concerns tonight, and the Ontario Party does have policies in place that will address all these concerns. Has the government violated your rights? The Ontario Party would hold accountable all those responsible while restoring those who've been punished for unjust measures. Our publicly funded healthcare system has been neglected. We will work to reduce the bloated administrative costs and increase the capacity to provide excellent healthcare for the people of Ontario. As far as protecting our children, we haven't spoken that much about it, but the Ontario Party will reform the education system to ensure that radical sex education and gender ideology is not introduced to young and vulnerable minds. We pledge to repair our economy by maintaining fiscal responsibility and ensuring that our free enterprise system is actually free. We need to make sure that housing is available for people. Young families must have that affordable housing. And so we need to make it easier for builders to actually build the housing that we need. You may say that's great, but how can you trust them any different? Our policy of recall and free votes makes sure that me as your representative am free to actually represent you, not to kowtow to a party whip. And as the only representative who has that freedom, I hope that you will choose me and the Ontario Party as your representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston, 1.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to also thank the teachers union for putting this on this evening, and you, Bill, for hosting. I got into this not because I wanted to actually my reason for running for politics is because there needs to be representation. There needs to be someone at Queen's Park who can represent the disability community. Someone that is going to fight for the community that has been neglected by everyone in the last Liberal and Conservative governments have neglected people with disabilities as well as seniors, and it's time to create the change we need. It has been a long time in the making, and it is time to sum around that the NDP get elected for this riding, and we did great in 2018. We got 30% of the vote, and this time around, we are planning on taking the seat and making sure that we have a dignified and fighting representative for you at Queen's Park. I had to fight for my life to be here today, and now I will fight for you to make the changes that are needed in this riding after many years of neglect and left solitude from what we have received and been abandoned at Queen's Park by our previous representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all of the candidates this evening for your thoughtful answers, for reminding us about the importance of traveler's checks. I want to thank the audience for attending and sitting very patiently and for asking some very engaging questions on a wide variety of topics. So thank you, audience, for participating tonight. We hope that this was an engaging debate and you got some of the answers you were looking for, and it will help make your voting choice easier. On election day, June 2nd, and also advance voting, I believe, begins on Thursday. So thank you for coming out this evening, and have a good evening, everyone, and a safe trip.
Okay, so there you have it. The Progressive Conservative Party candidate did not show up, and the New Blue Party candidate did not show up. So at the table, we had three socialist government is the answer candidates, and one candidate, Thomas Mulder, from the Ontario Party, who, represented more the worldview that I have in the political realm. So there you go. I'm going to end the live stream with my usual blessing, and maybe I'll get a chance to schmooze with a few people here, and who knows, maybe there's some Catholics here, some practicing Catholics. We're going to find out. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless each and every one of you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Go in peace. The truth sets us free. Live in the truth and live free.